try not to stand probably. I have to put my my knee on the chair so that it doesn't hurt too much. Right, okay, so here we go. So first, I'd like to say a few words about why it's interesting to design for international students. As it's obvious when you walk across this campus, it's a huge clientele now in all systems, especially in the UK, the USA, Australia, and France, which is the fourth biggest country welcoming international students. This population, bizarrely enough, is very much wanted by all universities around the world because they bring a lot of money, and this is very obvious in this university. At the same time, some colleagues, King and Raghuram, have written a really interesting piece about international students. They are desirable migrants, but at the same time, they are understudied. The people don't really research this population. There is some research and there's a growing body of research, but it's true that it has been understudied compared with other types of population. What are the specificities of these migrant students? First, we know that if stay abroad has to be profitable, it requires these students to interact meaningfully with domestic students, local people, and really insist on the meaningful interaction, meaningful and frequent interaction with expert speakers. And that's the main issue actually. Talking with Chinese students on this campus, they said how much difficult it was to find opportunities to interact meaningfully with local students, and that's certainly an area of interest for all of us. It seems to be even more the case with Asian students for different reasons, maybe cultural reasons, that seems to have even fewer contacts with local students. And Swagler and Ellis have written an old study about this, but the same kind of results keep coming in about this question. Sorry? Oh, yeah, right. Oh, yeah, of course, okay, so it's a bit confusing. Sorry about this. Right. Second. Yeah. Keyboard. This one? Yeah. Thank you. Right, what do we know about these migrants? That they are heavily connected, even maybe more so than domestic students, because they've got their lives here in the academic context, but they keep in touch with their family. It's not rare to see on campus people at different hours of the day keeping their mobile phones like this and having a conversation in Chinese with their folks back home. All right? Right. So it makes this going abroad less of a rupture, but at the same time, this can be a problem also about their engagement in the local environment. So what I'm going to present this afternoon are two studies. One, I'll take my time. The second one, I go a bit quicker about it. The idea is to understand the roles played by digital tools in these students' lives, and to use a concept that's been developed here, to use this knowledge to improve international students' experience abroad using these tools. And the idea in the long run is to design a mobile application for these students. Right, so as I said, I'm going just to explore a few notions with you. I'm going to present those two studies. The first one has to do with mobility. We know, and as I said, there's a growing body of research about this, that when you go abroad, especially one author, it's really interesting, it's Murphy Lejeune, started to write about students when Europe was still a big thing back in 2002, and she was interested in following students across Europe, and she started to write ethnographic studies about these students. It's really interesting. She's really started this line of studies. What Murphy-Lejeune, Kinginger, and other researchers have said, usually when you go abroad, it's also a good opportunity to reinvent yourself partially, of course, but there's also modification of some practices. This is especially the case, for instance, for Chinese students who can't use Facebook or other applications like Google, and when they, of course, they've got the same or more or less the same ones in China, but they've got to adjust these practices because they can't really use the same tools when they come here. So they've got to recycle, adjust, enrich their digital practices, so that's something that they have to do. And those digital tools also accompany this transition. So they are a good observatory to understand what goes on in the lives of these students. I thought it was also very interesting to focus on informal learning because I like this word a lot. I don't think it makes a lot of sense in English, interstices, let's say those small places, these in-between places when things happen and they're not obviously always, they were not formally thought to produce something. So this learning, where learning takes place, and opportunities can be seized by international students to learn about language and about culture. We insist a lot in France, but I'm sure it's the same here in Australia, about the fact that you see language and culture as two parts of the same object. So of course, a lot of people have talked about immersion. That was a big thing, back in Canada, back in the 70s and 80s. Now we don't really see this word again, but still, when people in brochures, when you sell this life abroad experience, that's usually the word you find. Okay, you're going to be immersed in a context, but actually, are you really immersed in this context? That's really the question. I really like the work of these two colleagues, Sefton Green and Erstat, who talk about learning lives. Usually, a lot of research in education are focused on learning in the classroom, informal learning on campus, but Sefton Green and Erstat and their colleagues want to expand this learning also in the city, in other places than where we are usually used to look for this kind of learning. So how does this those learning lives? How do you make sense of them, and how do they manifest themselves semiotically? Right. Now I'm going to say a few words about self-tracking. I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of applications that you can put on your mobile phone. If some of you run, you might know that in France we use something called Runtastic. So I'm sure you've got these wearable technologies that you can have telling you how many footsteps you've had in a day, how many calories you've eaten, if you've drank enough water, and so on. So this is self-tracking, and this is really interesting technology because that's something that didn't exist like 10 years ago, and now that's part of our lives, and that makes us aware of some of our consumption or habits and so on. Here an example of a friend that was trying to lose weight and just so using this Runtastic and putting this on Facebook afterwards, saying, look at me, I've done this race and I've lost so many calories and so on. So that's not only tracking oneself but also displaying the result online. So I think this is really interesting because I would say this is something which is kind of new, like 5 or 6 years old. If you, for us that are interested in education questions, the idea of self-tracking is also a good way to know what's going on when we look at informal learning. What you need actually is a GPS tracker, so everything on the mobile phone could work, a camera, a mobile phone, and the idea actually is to provide learners with some kind of awareness of what they do, what they can learn linguistically or culturally. The idea also of using these self-tracking tools would be to facilitate the meaning-making process. Right, so this first study that I'm going to present now had two aims. The first one was to identify what international students identify as digital learning opportunities outside the classroom. Okay, so that was interesting to know, and determine the potential of a digital and mobile self-tracking application to study and accompanies international students' transition. So, a few words about the context, data collection, and self-tracking tools that were used for this study. So the context of this study was the Centre International d'Études Françaises, a language center in Lyon, okay, where international students come to study French, usually before starting their studies in different fields. There was a mix of undergraduate and graduate students. They were both at a C1 or advanced level in French, which made it easier actually for the data they produced and the study of this data. There were 5 males, 11 females, and the age varied from 20 to 39. Well, the instructions we gave them actually were the following. They had to collect different data about their learning life. So here worded as this, it's a translation of course. Traces, meaning photos, images, text of moments of your lives outside the classroom where you have the feeling of experiencing something French, has to do with the language, the culture, or socialization. The idea, of course, as I told you very quickly at the beginning, the more you interact with people meaningfully through socialization, the more you have possibilities to improve your language. The idea also was, the second part of the instruction was, please take as many examples as possible so that we'll know what you've been doing. Okay, so it was a participatory research with these students. Right, now a few words about the self-tracking tools. Of course, that would have been too simple if we could have used the same self-tracking tool for all 16 students, but because of the systems they had on their mobile phones, we had to use two. One was Journey, that was for Android mobile operating system, and the other one was Day One for iOS. Both of them cost only $5 or €5, so at least $7 or $8. Okay, we paid for this, of course, and we helped them install this on their mobile phones. Of course, they all signed consent forms, and everything was very properly done also in this. So the idea actually with these two apps that were kind of similar, it was to, there's some kind of digital diary applications. The idea was for the students to produce entries both in textual and visual modes, and it was possible to explore them in a PDF format, right? So that was all wonderful because that provided us a vantage point to delve, to explore the informal learning and the learning opportunities of these students. But of course, I'd like to insist right now that there were blind spots because we made it clear to the students that they shared only what they wanted to share for obvious ethical reasons. So there are plenty of things we did not access, and that's okay. That's very correct. Right, I'll give you an example now of the kind of data we got here. So you would have the date and the time, the place, so here they were on campus. You would have here a screen cast of their phone. Here they were looking for the word relique, okay, which is pretty simple for English speaking and French speaking because it's the same kind of word with a definition, some kind of context. And here that was also what they said, some kind of reflection about their usage of this application. That is to say, in the book I was reading, there were some words in it no, such as relique. So this person used an application called French Helper to understand the meaning. And she used the different stars actually every time she came across the same word. So that tells us about what they do with these applications, how they use them, and how often and so on. So that's really interesting to know for examples. Right, I'm not going to present all the findings. If you're interested, I can send you the article that's in print at the moment, so I'd be happy to share this with you. Just a few findings. The first one I'd like to stress is this. Okay, so that is a quantitative finding. So if we had to look at textual entries, what we saw was there was evidence of learning strategies, but usually it was only a few words like relic, like different words that they had encountered. And usually what was really interesting is there was the word and the picture of the word. So there was some kind of contextualization of the word, which was interesting. Others were also just description and not very interesting words. Very matter of fact and very, like good students just saying, okay, I visited such a landmark, I spent 2 hours, I learned this, and that was it. You see what just something not very interesting. That was the majority of it. And then, and that's more interesting for us, there were also students who were able to capture events, objects, situations on the move, and then come back to it after a few hours and say, okay, this is something I saw, this is something I learned, and I'm going to write a little text about this and just associate words, cultural event, the meaning that has for me. So this is really interesting. But as you see, it only concerns 42.2 of all the textual entries. So a minority, but that's interesting actually. So they could play the game. And also I like to underline, I'm going to come back to this in a while, there were different levels of reflexivity. Some of the students were just, very, their level of reflexivity was very low, and others were really, a Brazilian student, for instance, I'm going to come back to, she was really into it and she really wanted to learn, she wanted to think about the language and so on. So maybe that takes also maturity, maybe that takes mediation and so on. So that's, that's something to think about. Right, so what we saw with this, that all these applications were useful for informal learning of French, but also they were useful in some daily life activities. For instance, one student was explaining how she would prepare herself to go to the doctors and just rehearse, find the words and so on, because she was really tense about taking an appointment at the doctors. And then she would prepare herself, record herself, and then after this she put all the different list of words and the sentences she had prepared and so on. And then she went to the doctors and said, okay, that was very useful as some kind of practice and so on. So we know this way what they do, how they do it and so on. Okay? So it seems this kind of application seems to facilitate students' lives and mobility, but it's also an area of questioning for me. Before we had all these applications, actually people had really to interact with people, saying, where can I find a good hospital to get my food treated? Where can I find a good Thai restaurant on King Street? Now you don't have to do this because you just ask Google and that does the job for you. So maybe what's good in terms of mobility is also not so good in terms of going to meet local people and asking them questions. Right. Okay, a few examples here of linguistic acculturation, visiting different landmarks, going to wine tasting sessions, going to the movies, going to soccer games, which is really big in Lyon. Right, acculturation. I told you about this Lucinda, Brazilian student, 39, and the age is important, of course. She said, well, I'm using this application to do yoga. At first it was in Portuguese and now it's in French. Okay, so you can see here there are signs of acculturation when you change your settings to the target language. So this is always a good sign of so someone who is trying to do something in in the French way. Let's say. What was also interesting was there were really students who just use this as learners, good learners, saying, okay, I'm doing the job. I'm just a good student. I'm going to show you that I'm a good student. I'm just going to send you data that correspond to what you would expect from a good student. Okay. Some of them were just acting as tourists. They say, oh my God, yes, I love it. Taking pictures and just reflecting about this. But that was it. Others also explained, and that was interesting, but that was rarer in the data, how they interacted with domestic students, saying, oh, for instance, I've noticed that drinking is different in France than in Germany. Okay, so that was a big thing. This woman explaining that she went to a party and everyone had brought bottles and they shared the bottles and so on. In Germany, that was different. I don't really know. We'll have to ask Peter about drinking in Germany and the difference with France. What's interesting also is these applications and using them seems to amplify the experience of mobility semiotically and emotionally. That is to say, it's not only living, but remembering about this experience and making something out of it. I'll come back to that in a minute. There's also a multimodal potential about this application because, as I said, you use the textual entries and the visual entries, and that seems to produce something that could be interesting. Let's see what this male Chinese student who's 21-year-old said. He was very careful in choosing the best picture, and that's what people have read. Discovered something more here. It's the work of someone called Deborah Van Hoven. I'm not sure about the name. Who works at UTS. Really, really fascinating work on the pictures, how people take pictures of themselves, and so on. Really fascinating work. And she says how important for people, especially young people, but not only young people actually, to use filters, to use the right framing, to use all this, what you put on Instagram, what you put on Facebook, and so on. So they did the same. Some of them did the same on this application. That says about you just. When you frame something, when you think about the framing, that's also framing your own experience and thinking about it, So it adds on some kind of semiotic layer. So also, what's interesting when you reflect about your life abroad, people ask you about it, it can be very, oh, well, that was nice, and you don't really know how to talk about it. What's also interesting with this kind of application is that it contextualizes different moments with text and with images. So that's interesting. The hypothesis I would make about this, it gives more saliency to some events, and maybe that would have to check this memorability to these events. So that's only a hypothesis. I'd like very much to be able to say if these experiences become more memorable because you've recorded them. My intuition is that yes, it is the case, but it has to be proven. Right. Also, what we see with some of the students, I really insist on the some, is that it might heighten the awareness of learning opportunities. Here, the example of a German student, Liz. I'm going to read this quickly because that's important. Yes, there were moments when I thought about the application. I would say to myself, this is a moment where I can write something because I'm learning something, I'm learning French, I'm speaking French, I'm with French people, I'm learning stuff about culture, they're telling me something about their culture, and I'm telling them about mine in exchange. We look if there are comparison similarities. I would think about the app when I became aware that we're talking about France and French culture. So, the fact that you have this app, of course, it's just like my friend using this application to run. one thing that he told me that fascinated me, actually, he said, if for some reasons this has not been recorded by my app, it's as if the race had not existed, as if I had not run, and it makes him really miserable. So it's the same. We can think about also if we find the right routine mediated by teachers, of course, and which would make sense in the classroom context. That is to say, what happens outside the classroom could be brought back to the classroom and mediated by a teacher. So maybe that there would be something very interesting. I'd like to say again that there were various levels of reflexivity from the students, and there's also fatigue. So you see, for instance, at the beginning of this experiment, the students were very good at producing plenty of data, and then by the end it became, for some of them, more or less frequent. And I experienced the same. I've been writing a diary since my arrival here in Sydney. I was very good at writing an entry every day, and in the last 2 weeks I've been too busy writing and I forgot about it. So that's something very very usual, I would say, with human beings. Right. So now I'm going to propose, that's the name of the person actually at UTS, that the reading of an article was really illuminating for me. So just a model now of international students' use of digital tools. What we see, so simple utilitarian use, how to find information, how to move around the city. The use of Google Map is really, really amazing, and how to, I've used the verb integrate, but just all the administrative stuff you have to do when you arrive in France, going to different administrative parties. The other one, social use of applications like Facebook, Instagram, and so on. So you want to share this with your friends, you want to expand your network, you want to exhibit who you're becoming in France, your French self, in this context. Difficult to explore, if we are in education, and I do believe it's difficult for us to colonize what our students do for social reasons. I think that might create some kind of problem. I'm more comfortable, obviously, with what happens on the linguistic and cultural level, checking conjugations, listing words, preparing. I gave you the example of this woman was preparing herself to go to the doctor, translating, recording, and so on. And the last one, I think the one that might be the most interesting, maybe for this application, is what has to do with experiential dimension. To memorize, to measure, to self-measure, and also to curate oneself in this. That is to say, just record and then come back and then make sense and then make links and so on. What we do actually with photographies, what we do with with articles. So this, but it's not writing an article. It has to write about yourself, about your experience, making sense of it, creating links and so on. This is this curation. I think maybe those two aspects could be explored with digital application. Very quickly now, I'm going to, of course, this is all linked. It's not one dimension that would be completely different from other dimensions. So that's why I put all this in the middle. Few words about a second study, but very very limited words. I'm going to talk about this second study. So this time it's really low tech, no mobile phones, space-based, because we use maps, paper maps that were from the network of Lyon transport system, okay, and self-tracking again. Those students, Chinese students, all of them, 30 students, during a semester, 12 weeks, we asked them to put stickers on a paper map every time they recorded an event in a familiar place, in an unusual place, learning opportunities and socialization with French people or local people. Also during the semester we organized 3 outings and we helped them to interact, prepare for interaction and so on with French people. For instance, went on a lovely square near my place, La Place Satonnet, which is very French, which captures the the Frenchness, I would say, Roland Barthes would say actually, of the place. And they had to interview mothers with little kids and ask them about how they dressed and why they dressed that way and what they did with the kids and so on. And they were very shy about doing this, but they said, it's the first time I've talked with a French person for real, not asking for bread or not ordering food in a restaurant, but really spending 20 minutes, 25 minutes with real French people. So that was interesting. The final exam also, we asked them questions. This is what's taking place about the different stickers that put on the map. The result of this has been just produced by colleagues in Lyon, geographers, and we're starting something, and that tells us about places. And maybe for some of you who attended the talk given by Carmen, I don't remember the name, but Carmen last month, was really interesting because what we get actually is not statistically significant, but it produces emotion data as well. Thing is, that place, for instance, which is one big garden, one big park, the Parc de la Tête d'Or, which is a lovely place in Lyon, which seems to be a safe place to socialize and to learn. Okay, so that tells us about the good places, I would say, in a city. And maybe that also gives us food for thought when you organize outings, when you want students to feel safe, but when you want also to get them out of their comfort zone. So that's interesting. I won't explore any longer because I don't want to be long. I'd like to leave time for questions and interactions with you. But that's what we're also trying to produce. The idea actually, we could imagine that if we design an application week after week, obviously they would first go to the frequent places and the usual places like landmarks. If you go to Sydney, obviously the first thing you do is to go to the opera and you take pictures of yourself in front of the opera. I've done that, obviously you want to go to the landmark. But then you explore, and some of them might explore in different ways and so on. If you're Chinese, maybe you're going to explore in a different way. If you're a woman, maybe you will feel unsafe in some places and so on. So that's interesting to compare. So the idea would be to compare in different types of campuses, with different types of students, different ages and so on, and that would be really interesting to see if this map would be different from the one we get from 20-year-old Chinese students. All right? Now, a few concepts I'd like to propose, and that's brand new, but that's something I've tried to write during my stay here. Something about the semiospatial awareness. As I said, it's brand new, so I'm still not completely okay with it. First thing would be to help those students to support their orientation capacity. That is to say, to be able to read the landscape, the linguistic and cultural landscape, okay, the signs and so on, and to be able to orient themselves, but also to understand people's local practices, okay, and see how they differ. Of course, we've got different neighborhoods in Lyon, like you have in Sydney, and that's always, you don't behave in the same way in Waterloo or in certain suburbs and so on. I won't go too far because I'm not sure I'd be a specialist. So first thing would be to orient. The intercultural capacity, what you used to do in your own culture, and stretching these habits to a new context, to a new cultural context, so that you're able to participate in this local culture. Usually it's through cultural activities, sports and so on, but it's not enough. And of course, collect evidence about this. The last one, and the one maybe that's the most interesting to me, I've used the word aesthetic. Maybe that could be bodily, emotional capacity to be sensitive to atmospheres, to sense, to foods, to impressions. My background is in literature. A long time ago, I was a big fan of Marcel Proust. I'm still a big fan of Marcel Proust, actually. And what Proust has captured is the importance of these feelings, of these impressions, actually, and how important they are for your memory. And I do believe this is important. So this sensitivity that you've got to develop towards something that's foreign, but that's going to make it a bit special. I've got an example actually on the way to the gym every morning. There's this frangipanier in my street, and this is a tree you don't find in France. And for me, I think this cine will be forever associated with this frangipanier because it's really a lovely smell. And the idea is for them to collect evidence on the move and make something out of it, you know, in multimodal formats, so textual, maybe video that wasn't used in those two studies, and enrich them with other semiotic layers. And that was something we didn't do in the first two studies, but I think that's very interesting to do, is to share them with their peers, so that you can compare, so that you can see if, you know, from one person, from one individual to the other, you know, all this experience is going to be different. Well, I'm almost finished now. A few words about the application we want to work on with computer scientists and geographers. The idea would be thus to facilitate the multimodal recording of significant events. But of course, it has to be mediated by a teacher. You know, it's difficult when you're 20-year-old to decide what's significant. You know, so maybe everything goes, anything goes at the beginning, and then maybe refine this sensitivity to what is significant when you're born. Categorization, of course, you got to put it in boxes. That's also what you want to do in some ways. Just, I said anything goes at first, but of course you got to know if it's about the language, it's about the culture, it's about language and culture, if it's about something else, you know. So this categorization could be facilitated by an application. Harnessing their linguistic and cultural potential, so maybe links or, I don't know, there's still a work in progress. Offer the possibility of adding an extra semiotic layer, that's to say, not only recording, that'd be too easy, that would be not very interesting, you know, taking plenty of pictures and maybe adding words, that's not enough. So maybe adding, you know, semiotic layer, and especially, as I said, sharing these discoveries with peers. And that way, maybe, you know, we could support the integration of international students, make their lives maybe more, make their stay abroad maybe more interesting, maybe more sensitive, maybe more, I don't know, paying attention to small details that make your life abroad interesting. Thank you.